good afternoon to you all. I have to say, it is really special to see a full auditorium again. So yeah, on that note, indeed, a very, very warm welcome to you all, and welcome back to the audience to Chicago. And a very special welcome to Igshaan Adams.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Whose exhibition Desire Lines will be discussing and celebrating this afternoon. And I hope that some of you may have had the opportunity to see the exhibition already. If not, the museum is open until 5, so you have a lot of time, hopefully. My name is Hendrik Volkerts. I am the former curator of modern and contemporary art here at the Art Institute. Currently, thank you. That's very kind. Currently a curator of international art at Moderna Museet in Stockholm, Sweden, and I have been collaborating with Igshaan and his wonderful team in the last 2.5 years to make the exhibition and the book Desire Lines. And the exhibition brings together kind of key projects from your work since 2015-16, which, let's say, culminates in a new commission in the second room. And again, for those of you who may have seen the show, they know exactly what I'm speaking about. But for those of you not, it will all become clear, because we'll really sort of talk through some of the works in the show, to give you a lot of kind of background and context. But I think what the exhibition also does, and that's also something that we'll spend some time with, is a really expansive and radical approach to weaving as a medium and as a practice. So that's something that I'm also really excited to speak about. Before we dive in, I want to give thanks where thanks is definitely due, and that is to the engagement and programs team of the Art Institute of Chicago, who have helped to make this event a reality, and our brilliant AV team in the back. Yes, thank you, thank you. Give them a warm round of applause. Thank you for that. Desire Lines. Let's start. Desire Lines, as some of you may know, is a pathway. It's a pathway created by an individual to get somewhere faster, a more sort of expedient route, but it can also be a transgression of sort of a barrier or sort of a boundary that may exist in space. Igshaan has been engaging with the Desire Lines in various forms in his work in the last 10 years, I want to say. First and foremostly with his sort of profound investigation of like the linoleum sheets that you'll see in the exhibition and in this talk as well, to understand sort of the pathways that form in someone's homes, in the home of where you grew up, in the family or homes that sort of in your community in Cape Town, and the homes of many friends and sort of people that you know still today. So we'll touch on that. And then sort of Desire Lines, sort of a pathway that is formed by a single person and where many people follow in the footsteps of in the space of a city. And what these sort of pathways mean, and how can we sort of investigate them on sort of a material level, a sort of a conceptual level, and also, and that's where I want to start actually, a spiritual one. Because much of your work is anchored in your sort of engagement and practice with Sufism. And I want to set the stage in a way to really keep our eye on what sort of journey you as an artist have been through as well to get to the work that you make. So maybe we'll start with a very straightforward question, say, what is sort of Sufism to you, and how has it helped you shape your vision as an artist?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming and for being here. I would say I was introduced to Sufism around the age of 26, 27, and I think at this point I was at art school. At this point, I think my life was a mess, to be honest. It was a complete mess, and My earlier life and my earlier work and career kind of dealt a lot with the different aspects of my identity, and specifically the ones that were in conflict with each other. So I grew up in Cape Town, or a township called Pontierville, during the last decade of apartheid. I was born Muslim. My father was Muslim, but my mom was Christian, and I was raised by her parents, my grandparents, who were Christians. So essentially, I was raised Muslim in a Christian home by Christian people, and my grandmother just really loved Islam and wanted to give us that Islamic education. I think also my religion and the religion I was born in versus my sexuality, being queer as a teenager, all of these aspects were in conflict. And during apartheid, we were classified as second class, in between. In fact, my brother and I would have had different classifications because he's slightly lighter of complexion to myself. And the structure and the system of apartheid was certainly enacted within the domestic home. I mean, people were treated according to your skin tone, your texture of your hair. These things were, your physical appearance had a lot to do with how you would be received, or even what your life would be expected to become, So in my earlier 20s, I was in a really bad state, honestly, and was looking for some kind of platform. I was introduced to a woman called, we call her Ma, or a Marikia, who's a Sufi master, and who I spent about 4 years just really learning and absorbing as much as I could from her. And to your question about what does Sufism mean to me, I'm not a Sufi. I haven't made that commitment or that pledge to follow a particular path. But I know that my time there has kind of influenced or has created a certain lens through which I view the world, and certainly the understanding of that I operate in the world according to what I've learned from her. But Sufism gave me that platform because it really is just an internal focus, which, it's really about the individual looking inward, really trying to figure out what happens internally. And Islam, in its basic, for me, it was at the time, the question I had was, am I able to experience some sort of peace internally? Because I didn't know what that was like, to have that peace. I mean, we grew up with a lot of violence and a lot of chaos. And so, yeah.
I mean, I want to focus a little bit on this kind of inward journey, projected outward, which is
Yes.
what so much of your work is about, but also like your relationship with Sufism. In the exhibition, we have two works that almost like bookend the show, two roses, and one of them you'll see on the screen over here. And they are the force field of the show. They are two kind of very important symbols to you that also speak to your training or your sort of time with Ma, your kind of Sufi mentor. Can you talk about the rose and how it came into your life as a symbol, and maybe we take as a stage to talk through the work a little bit as well?
Sure. Well, this woman, Marikia, she used the rose to explain to me a certain concept. I mean, she was trying to get to the point of why it's important to go through painful experiences and how important the importance of pain that plays in your life. And for her, the rose was a perfect symbol. I mean, what she was talking about was the thorns representing that pain, but also protection, And she was making the link between pain as a form of protecting yourself and how it plays out in very bad ways at times, but But in this kind of demonstration, she would take the rose and then at some point very violently destroyed its petals. Well, first she actually started by removing one petal and just explaining that, everything I had experienced, which I thought at the time I have now released and dealt with so much issues. And I think she was trying to say to me, look, whatever you experienced at this point was only like removing one petal. Because in a similar way, I mean, it's in a very close to the idea of veils. I mean, there's a saying that in Islam we speak of 1,000 veils that separates us from true reality, and the path of enlightenment is really about removing those veils one at a time, and seeing things clearly for the first time, things that had always been there, but seeing it for the first time, or seeing it clearly for the first time. And I think we all can relate to this idea to some extent, you know, that there are things that is visible to us that we might not always see clear for what it is. And this process of clarity. So for her, the rose and the petal was another symbol of the same idea. Individually removing a petal is like kind of taking the one step closer to where we want to be. So as she was kind of destroying the rose, she got to the center point where the seed was, and just kind of spoke about the importance again of a symbolic death. You know, in Sufism, they speak of the desires or the base desires, and the denial of these desires to the point where you kill it off, and a certain aspect of your identity dies. So there was the symbolic death associated with the rose as the rose goes through its cycle, with the new potential for a new cycle to form. And the two roses you talk about, it's the same rose that I planted and photographed at two different points of its life cycle. So the smaller one being as it's about to open up, and this one on the screen being at the pinnacle, the height of its bloom and beauty. Yeah. Also, I want to point out that these two, what made it more meaningful was that I did make these works with my sister and my mom were involved with the production of it.
I mean, I also love, and that's more of a side note, how much of your work kind of has these lines sort of towards the floor, and it's a rose that very much is rooted for that reason kind of in the show as well. I will also emphasize that none of what you see here does any justice to what you'll see in space, so see this in real life, because, and that's what we'll get, is like, your kind of like relationship to weaving in that sense has also seen many forms over the years. And here in this image here, juxtaposing two works like the rose that we just discussed and another sculptural work that you sort of collaborated with Carl Moorland with, called Stoffelijke Oorschot, which is Afrikaans, and it means physical remains. And the sculpture itself, as it's laid out in space, will read almost as a forensic site in a way, a sort of a body that has been sort of draped out its space, and it relates very strongly to this notion of like symbolic death and what like remains after that. Would you sort of take us into that a little bit?
Yeah, like you said, this was a collaboration between myself and Kyle Moorland, who did the metal, who basically his metal sculptures I inhabited or kind of created the skin for. And at first, the two materials wouldn't merge. It kind of was fighting each other, and it was only through artificially aging these two materials, basically rusting the steel, and I aged it through the skin. I just aged through cleaning the studio with it, and then throwing it in the washing machine, and the cycle of cleaning and dirtying ultimately relax the fibers, where it starts to feel a bit like it takes on a history, you know. But the idea of a symbolic death, it goes back a little bit. I mean, you're familiar with the performance I did with my father, which I know is not in here, but I would like to share that a little bit with you. In this performance, I've asked my father to wash and prepare my body as if I had died in the Islamic ritual. And what was amazing about that experience was I knew something died in that process. I'm talking about the very first time we did the performance. So my father, to begin with, he was the bad guy. He was violent. He was an addict. He was abusive towards my mom, and he was very irresponsible as a father. And so I certainly grew up with this very strong feeling of hatred towards him. And I knew that where I was in my life, in my early 20s, had a lot to do with accepting that I came from him, that there are aspects of me that is reflected in him and that I needed to accept, deal with it, or at least filter through the parts of him that I admire and that I want to retain, and the parts of him that I see in myself that I needed to kind of kill off, you know. And also, it was very difficult for me to not see him not see him in a different way, you know, to not see him as this monster. I think it was hard for me to change that view of him that I had as a kid. And this performance was incredible. I mean, I think I really understood in that performance the power and effectiveness of a ritual and why it has played such a role in human societies across the board. So in this ritual, the way I've made sense to it myself, or for myself, was that this younger version of me died and opened up a space for me to kind of renegotiate a relationship that has really worked. I mean, it not just changed my life with him, but also our entire family has been changed because of it, you know. And things, he's a lot better father than he used to be.
And just to use that as a bit of a segue, because this is also a time in your practice where you start to focus a bit much more on almost like sort of unweaving or sort of deconstructing weaving in a bit. And I think the sculpture here in the front, but also many other works in the show kind of show that phase in your practice really well as something that needs to be sort of taken apart.
Exactly.
In order to be sort of to be put together again.
And this process had to do with my intention of really looking closely at what had happened to me as a child in my domestic space, really starting to look at our home as this kind of, like you said, a site, for forensic investigation, you know. So I started with our own home, and then started kind of with the families in our neighborhood that I knew had some kind of impact on me, or I've been watching and had a certain kind of interest in, or at least families that I thought I could co-opt their stories in terms of telling my own story through theirs. Yeah.
Let's move to that home,
sure.
In a way, because at the heart of this exhibition is an installation titled "When Dust Settles," which is really part of a much longer sort of engagement on your part with this linoleum. And it's material that I guess in one shape or form we all know or might have sort of a relationship to, but sort of in your case it was always part of the family home, and sort of many homes in your community. And you started to investigate it almost like forensically,
exactly.
As you say, trying to understand what this material is and what stories it can hold. And before we go to Larkweg, which was one work that I just now skipped, maybe you could kind of introduce to us when the linoleum first became a material for you to use artistically, and how that worked.
Yeah, okay. So the first linoleum I extracted was actually Ivan. And in the exhibition, there's a work titled Ivan's Kitchen. And Ivan's Kitchen is actually the linoleum that I had replaced many, many years ago. I think it was back in 2009, replaced this linoleum, extracted her old, and then went back last year and recorded the linoleum that I had given her many years ago. But this material, I mean, there's a few things. Firstly, I've always been attracted to materials that didn't have much value to begin with. You know, there was no value attached to this material. In fact, people hated it. It represented poverty. If you started making a bit of money, if the family is doing well over time, the first thing they would do is replace the linoleum with tiles or with wooden floors. This was like the first step towards living a better life. So it's not a material that brings back good memories for many of us. I certainly remember having to clean them and all, the drama that went with just keeping it clean. But for me, I saw the opportunity to bring value to something that was overlooked in terms of its value. I saw that there was each of everybody's floors tended to be quite unique to that family, depending on how it was used, how furniture is placed, and then these paths that ultimately form as the patterns wear out and this information is removed through foot traffic. And so they became imbued with the history of that family, at least in a certain period of and what happens privately. So yeah, that's where I started. I started looking at them looking at the marks left behind through domestic use, as kind of fantasizing about these marks and what it ultimately, thinking of them as events that took place that left these marks behind. Yeah.
And I mean, just to give you one example, like for instance, if you look at the top left of this image, you see sort of a pathway, and often these sheets would be layered over time,
exactly.
Right? Because it's like, inexpensive. So if it's like, dirty or like sort of it has, let's say, eroded, then people would often kind of put one sheet on top of the other, and you can literally excavate a home.
And that's what we've done in many cases.
Layers.
Exactly, we've been excavating. It's amazing. I mean, you see, it's so much history layered on top of each other. In some cases, of course, we go for the bottom layer.
Exactly, yeah. But why I wanted to kind of point out the top left of this image is to go to a work that is installed in the show just prior to this, and to move the conversation a bit to blank spaces.
Sure. I just wanted to add about the linoleum and when dust settled exhibition. The intention there really was, because of the history of South African apartheid, that history is still very much clear in terms of segregation of races and how effective apartheid system was in keeping people apart. Unfortunately, there's a very clear animosity between the race that I'm from, or the classification that I was given, versus the black Xhosa-speaking communities in Cape Town, for instance. So the works are on the show, some of them titled Langa. Langa refers to the township that was our neighboring township, where was a black township. And despite the fact that we were both marginalized communities, the apartheid government kind of reinforced this idea into my community that we are better than them, right? So there's already this kind of setup against each other, despite the fact that we were both marginalized, both suffered under the system. And this material is a material used in both communities, in most homes. And the simple idea I had was to just extract from both of these communities and mash them up in a space that one would never be able to tell which comes from which,
You're totally right. Let's actually stay in this space for like a second, because, you've also installed in the past, and we have one sort of example here, these very beautiful sort of anthropomorphic, almost like spectral, like sculptures in relationship to the linoleum. And I want to ask you first, part of the material that you use to build these woven sculptures is this fencing type of material, and sort of it relates to what you were saying,
yes,
how fences may separate certain communities.
Sure, I think I was trying to point to using this fence. So I think you're all familiar with this. It's typically this dark green metal fencing with this pattern very low down that is used in gardens. And it's a material my family would have used. We had a really beautiful garden up front in our home. For me, it represented these barriers. I thought that as the physical barriers go up, so does the mental barriers. So they kind of represent both in a way. And my intention was to create these white figures, these anthropomorphic figures that's present everywhere you go in the space, So they were always either lying on the floor or suspended, or in this case, upright. But they were always figures that became the witnesses of what takes place in these private spaces.
Precisely. And to go back to the pathways a little bit, and that's what I want to move towards here before we maybe circle back to kind of other iterations of this linoleum, is the pathway as sort of an eroded one in the linoleum tells us a lot. And I find this work, which is called Larkweg 1 and 2, because it's sort of the mirror image of one another, so striking because it's one of the first sort of instances in your work where sort of the pathway, which is this blank and undefined space, one could argue, materialize as sort of a positive space. So rather than focusing on, you know, let's say the sheet of linoleum itself, what we see here is sort of the pathway that formed in someone's home and what that means and says, actually. Whose home is this? Who are we looking at here?
Her name is Priscilla. She was the woman who took care of my grandparents before they died. These pathways document the pathway from her front door to the back door and the whole space, right? So it's during apartheid, once again, you know, in this 1960s, Cape Town, Cape Town was declared a white areas space, and the Cape Flats was formed, this kind of arid, flat space, and where all the townships formed over time. So her family would have moved to Bontierville back in the 60s. Her mom got that house, and she's always lived there. It's the only home she knows, and the floor has kind of documented their lived experience for all of that time since the family moved in originally back in the 60s. And so there's this path that my decision to mirror it was really just trying to point to the idea that there's this public life we live, and then there's a private life, and those two can be very different, even though they seem similar. There's definitely differences between the two. But yeah, there was something else I want. In terms of the decision to kind of fill in the blank spaces that had been worn out over time, this was why I did the path in this way. And it's how we started the show, right? Is the question of if we knew everything about someone, how would we treat them differently? It was really just a question of these pathways or these blank spaces kind of forming over time, representing the absence of knowledge or information when we meet people. So when you meet Priscilla, you don't know her life, her story, everything that had happened to her. But unfortunately, our brains might kind of convince us that we know a few things about her simply by how we profile her. And this happens to everybody. I think we all do it to some extent. But it's certainly something I have to deal with in Cape Town. I mean, we were talking, my studio managers here, and it's something we had to deal with while here in Chicago. You know, you kind of get that that kind of sense of anxiety when someone looks at you and they take a wide path around you. Certainly on the train, Monet was talking about how people stayed clear of him here. You know, so it's the same. It's the same experience in Cape Town. Wherever I go into a shop, I'm definitely a thief. I'm definitely there to cause harm to someone, and this is what we deal with constantly. So, and I think there was a period where it really got to me, where I was really fed up with it all, and just kind of reflected on that idea of if people knew who I was, how would they treat me differently?
And Priscilla's life, you know, opens up in a very kind of amazing way here, because, and you'll see that in the show, you can see where she was sitting by the door looking out of the window in a way, and you can see where her foot were sort of on the couch, simply by reading through this like weaving that is on the floor. And I think sort of the mirror image as an expression of navigating sort of an interior life and sort of an exterior life again.
Exactly.
Is so key to this, and it kind of brings us a little bit to, well, here are some other close-ups of the linoleum, but maybe to also discuss a different type of like manifestation of the linoleum, more as a sort of wall-based work, as you see here, where sort of the pattern of the actual sheet is still sort of legible in a way, but what is so striking about this work is the layering. You know, you see sort of the pathway, of course, kind of sort of diagonally across this work, but also what's underneath there.
Yeah.
And it leads me to a question to ask, how weaving really, as a practice, which is so sort of entangled with this layering as well, became the chosen expression for you, because you have worked actually in a lot of media. I mean, started as a sort of a painter. You've done a lot of performances as well, and but weaving seems to fit so well with what you want to do, and maybe bring us into that world of how weaving really. Sorry, I'm using all these metaphorical words, of course, because it's so easy with weaving. Kind of unfolded for you.
Sure. So after graduation in 2009, I got the job at an NGO in Kailicha, which again was a black township, and the NGO's it was a child health and nutrition center who worked with the malnourished kids in that community. And back in the 80s, they realized that they needed to, of course, empower the mothers of these kids in order to help them better. So they started an employment project. I got there around 2010, and I had to learn to weave, because they were weaving already, and they weave with recycled fabrics from the textile industry in Cape Town. And so I needed to learn to weave in order to help them better. My job was to improve their skills and help them create more sellable craft objects. My assistants now are two of the women that I worked with back then. So my two main assistants are the women that I worked with. I sat with the idea for 5 years on weaving. I wanted to weave, but just couldn't find the materials that I was excited about. I knew I didn't want to go with traditional materials. I wanted to find things that resonated or that was meaningful for me. And so I started with the idea of, previously, I used quite a bit of the Islamic prayer rugs, and I would collect the prayer rugs in a similar way to the body leaving its imprint in the linoleum. These prayer rugs would often also record those actions of worship in the prayer rugs, and I'd been collecting them and then making installations. With the idea of weaving, what I wanted to do was unravel the prayer rugs and then make thread and then reweave them in a symbolically saying that we make our own Islam. You know, everybody has to make their own Islam in a way, because we would focus and attract things that is most meaningful to you. So for me, it was all about my sexuality and being in conflict with this religion, and that's kind of the Islam I formed over time. So this was the idea. Unfortunately, it became quite practically difficult to get that amount of fibers and made into twine. I approached a few companies. And so one of the companies was already making a rope, and what they were doing was just whatever leftover materials instead of throwing it away. And they do highly specialized ropes, so they would just mix different fibers and and make this recycled rope, which I was really drawn to, and I still use the same rope. And what was really interesting about the rope was that depending on what was available that particular day, every bale of rope I've ever bought has never been 100% a copy of before. You know, you can never buy the same combination of colors, because each of them are so, like I said, depending on what was left over. And another thing that happens is, what happens on the outside in terms of these colors are not what's going on the inside. And so there's also this discovery of how the rope evolves as you unroll it.
One of the stories that you shared this week, which I found so striking, it speaks to the people that you work with to make this weavings as well, which has sort of grown into quite a substantial team. And it's yet another expression of what stories are held within your work, is who you kind of, let's say, collaborate with to make it work. And there's this sort of two sort of sisters that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe just an invitation to recap that story.
Sure.
Because it's so great to share here, I think.
Yeah, I've because all of the weavers and all the assistants I've known for so long. I know we have. I feel like I have an individual relationship with each of them. What I have noticed over time is that the personality pushes through in the hand of the weaver. So, in a similar way that one's handwriting kind of expose certain aspects of who we are, the weaving, it's the same thing. So, what I have started doing many years ago is, depending on my intention, so the work that we're looking at the moment, I knew it would be quite a graphic and work, so I would have asked Pumeza to do this work because she, in her own personhood, has this strong, robust personality. It's in her hands, it's in her body, and that hand pushes through. Her sister, in contrast, Zandi, she's very gentle. She's a very sweet and kind person. Not that Pumeza is not nice. She's just like, I mean, I'm scared of Pumeza, let me just tell you. But Zandi is just so different to her. So with Zandi, I would use Zandi if I want to create a work that is a little bit quieter and subtle in its tones. And so the work called Spooksnay on the show would have been made by Zandi, and the roses would have been made by Pumeza. Yeah.
A certain boldness.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sort of, yeah. It's really in there. And I don't have an image of this, but this work in the exhibition, kind of right next to it, is the work that would have been made with her sister.
Yes.
And you can see them. You can see the two sisters.
Yes, you do actually. You do.
And it's this beautiful moment in the show.
This work was also titled Achterom, which translates as it's a direction, or not? It's an instruction. It's an instruction to use the back entrance, and there's a lot of politics around that in our family. It was in my earlier life. This was a thing. Certain people get to use the front door, and other people get the instruction to use the back entrance. And then again, this was played out in a way that there's a hierarchy of, if you are special, you get to use the front door. And that's what it's referring to.
We're looking at Langa now, which is a very recent work and a microcosm of the desire line kind of relationships in your work, I think. It is a weaving that represents an aerial view of a sort of a plot of land that separates various neighborhoods. I was wondering if you could sort of take us into it. Because on the left side, in sort of the west side would be sort of a neighborhood where you grew upon, sort of separated, and lines start forming in the landscape.
Yeah, sure. I think for me there was a shift a little bit from When Dust Settles, which is the installation of the linoleum with these white figures, and I think that exhibition really came from a very painful place. It was something I needed to do for myself. With these design lines, I guess I've taken a bit more of a positive view of this kind of socio-political situation I find myself in terms of the segregation of races. I mean, Langa, like I said, is the black neighborhood that's next to Bonteheuwel, where I grew up, and then there's the highway in between. And highways were used very effectively to separate communities during apartheid. I guess for me, the desire lines in this case, it becomes evidence that these boundaries are being crossed, because it takes a lot of foot traffic to keep them there, because the grass eventually will just grow and cover the pathways. And so obviously people are using or crossing the boundary constantly every day in order to keep these boundaries. So to begin with, this was what they meant to me. And another position I took was to bring forth the idea that there are two perspectives. It's the perspective of the outsider, or like using Google Earth. Any of you can go and you'll find that pathway. You'll be able to recognize it in space, and anybody can have a look through Google Earth, look at Bonteheuwel. Unfortunately, in Cape Town, Bonteheuwel has become this kind of township that is synonymous with death and gangsterism and things like that. It's always reduced to something quite negative, which I'm sure all of you would understand. I mean, I'm sure it happens here too. So my position was to also bring forth works that come from that space, but gives the view of an outsider's view, or looking from Google Earth, but also looking up close and being inside the space and really being able to investigate up close. And so between Langa and then the Epping installation, the big installation, these are the two views I hope to bring forth, you know, kind of a spectator as well as a participant.
Yeah, and I mean the work, like these two works, so like Langa, which you just saw, and here kind of a good view of the central installation, Epic 2, they are sort of two parts of the same coin. I mean, exactly as you say, sort of a bird's eye view and actually being inside the space and what that means. Of course, you know, when you are in the exhibition, you are sort of invited to navigate this installation, and it's a very impactful sensation to kind of stand in the middle of this work and see kind of this woven terrain kind of unfold around you, also with these clouds. What's very striking is, of course, the red. How did red come about in Epic 2?
It's just the tone of the earth. I don't know if you could tell from that video, but the earth there is quite red in tone, and so I wanted to use that to kind of also anchor the work in some way. This work is a layering of ideas, right? So the pathway comes from one place in Epping, which is again the neighboring community to Bonteheuwel where I grew up, but it's industrial, so it's the path kind of invites you to, as you approach it, there's a single path that leads you in, and then many paths to exit the installation. This is around the station there, Bonteheuwel station, where, you know, people come from the station, and then everybody goes to their respective communities. So this, for me, was this kind of meeting point where no matter which community you're from, everybody meets there, and then they separate out. The dust clouds, as you've seen, is just this kind of superimposing the idea of the real dance on top of the pathways, to bring a little bit of joy and lightfulness to the idea. And like I said, the tone really just refers to the place, the actual place. The land there has a very red tone, earth to it. It's very dry, a very dry space. Yeah.
Something I actually forgot to ask about Langa, which I want to ask now, is sort of these desire lines. You've woven them in this kind of gold, this like very like luminescent gold, actually.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the story behind the choice for that gold? Because it is utterly striking.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you a little bit about another work I made. It's just recently showed in Cape Town, actually, in a solo show there. I made an exhibition, again, kind of based on these desire lines. And in that case, it was really, you know, the bird's eye view and then the worm's eye view kind of next to each other. And then in the second space, I created an installation which I called prayer clouds, and there everything was gold, including the dust clouds and as well as the pathways. Everything was made in this gold metal, and the gold references material gain. The exhibition there was titled Skarrelbaan, which means to be on the hustle, to be on this journey, to be on this on the hustle. He said, you know. So what I was thinking for that installation really was, you know, if you imagine throughout the show, in that solo show in Cape Town, throughout the show there is this fictitious character, this female character that walks, you know, that's looking for, she's on the hustle. She needs to find a potato, she needs to find an onion. This is kind of what I grew up with, seeing neighbors and other women in the community always having to travel. You know, nothing's going to come to you if you just sit at home and you don't have a pot of food to serve to your family that evening. So you have to be on the hustle. You have to go to, and if no one's going to help you, travel. You walk these paths. You know, you go to the next community because you might know someone that you used to work with or whatever, and you find what you look for. And I started reflecting on the idea that when we walk in this path, and it's something I would have done in my earlier life, you know, walking in Epping, these paths that you're looking at, these would have been where I walked on the hustle, looking for a job, looking for any form of income. And what I remember, as you're walking, you always walk with prayers, you walk with hope, you walk with these kind of thoughts in your mind, hoping that there will be some solution at the end of your journey. And in that case, what I had been thinking was, so what happens to these prayers, since most of them will never be answered? And I made an installation with the idea, using these gold charms or coin-like charms representing an individual prayer that kind of had caught up in a cloud and never reached God because it wasn't answered, you know. And so the gold represents that the aiming for material gain.
Yeah, and also the hope.
The hopefulness.
Imbued in that. And as you walk through this installation, there is a sense of that hope and that kind of sort of a journey that you're on, really, as you're walking in that space. And with your permission, we're going to run a little late, if that's okay, because I feel that, you know, this is such a great conversation, and I don't want to sort of abruptly end it, and definitely want to speak about one more work before we give you an opportunity to ask questions, of course. So I'm going to move to one other work that you kind of saw in the background of this already, over there, and now kind of here a close-up. I was a hidden treasure that I wanted to be known, which kind of circles a little back to where we started in a way, to your conversations with Ma, and a journey that you have been on as a human being and as an artist, which is around the role of like creativity in your life. And that was a question that you asked her at a certain point.
Yes.
What was her response?
Yeah, well, her response was kind of took me by surprise. I think at the time the questions I was asking her was about representation in Islam and why is this a problem. I really wanted to get a kind of a mystical point of view on this. And we ended up talking about creativity, and I asked her, so what's the role of creativity in all of this, in this life? Or at least, how do you see creativity? And her response was that there isn't anything more important than this. Everything is created with this energy, and it permeates everything. I mean, it's always interesting to me when people say they're not creative, because I think that's impossible. If you put together an outfit, you're creative. And so that creativity, and then she started talking about, in the Quran it speaks of the universe as being made in this kind of ever-expanding, she used the analogy of water dripping, and she started talking about, if you imagine water dripping, and over time moss forms, and if it continues for a long time, something grows, and it continues to grow and expand, and this is the essence of, this is only possible because of creativity itself. Exactly. And so in this case, the way we approach making this work was also just starting at one point and letting it grow. And of course, the tones then become, influenced by her story of moss. But it also becomes this camouflaged surface, which refers to the title. I mean, I think it's from the Hadith probably, where God says the reason He created man was because he was a hidden treasure and he wanted to be known, and then he was known. And it was only through creating humanity that he is known.
I mean, when you stand in front of this work, there's something simultaneously shy and bold about it, and of course you see that in the name as well, to sometimes feel that you're shielding yourself from something, but sort of a decision to
Step
be
out.
a creative, and in your case, to be an artist and to take ownership in a way of that, like sort of a position. So unwillingly, perhaps, I've sort of entangled this a lot with your story as well. But I mean, everyone who will stand in front of this work, can have sort of a relationship, because I think we all go through this at a certain point in our lives.
Exactly.
Like, how do we want to be in the world and in relationship to other sort of people? And that is so key to this show as a whole. There's many notes to follow up on, but I am looking in the audience as well, because this is your moment as much as ours. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions. If you do, please come to the fore a little bit. We'll have microphones coming up now that you can use. If you're in the middle of there and it's hard to get up, just raise your hand and we'll find a solution. I'm looking around. But maybe something else that I just want to highlight as you are sort of collecting your thoughts is that, a wonderful part of this project has also been the book that we made, which I hold in my hand here. And it's something that, of course, I sort of encourage you to get, but also what the most kind of special thing is, in addition to a lot of beautiful essays and texts that really sort of open up your work in so many ways, I think. At the heart of this book is a visual essay made by you, a meditation, a reflection on materiality, on sort of the pathway in a very, in space, in a different way than we have seen sort of articulated in some of the works. And I think it's really so stunning, actually. So please get this book. It was very funny. We had 25 books sort of for the opening weekend. No doubt they have been sold out yet. The new shipment comes in on Monday, so you'll be able to get it from Monday on. But just keep it in the back of your mind, please. There's a question over there with the microphone, please.
Hi, thank you for sharing your beautiful work with us.
Thank you.
I am curious about your workshop and how that works, how that plays out in your work. Is it something that's always been the way you work, or is it just a function of maybe a certain body of work that you want to do and then it goes away? I just wanted to hear more.
Well, I have a whole community of people in my studio. I've at any given time, there's probably up to 15, 16 people, about 8 or 9 weavers, and there's a buzz, there's a whole community connected to my practice. First of all, the people that are in the studio, but also the homes, that's often the homes that we extract the linoleum from. They become people we ask to do the stringing of the beads. And how I do that is just by mixing different loose beads together in the same way one would do with spices, for instance. And we bag it up and send it to different homes. And so in that case, of course, what comes back to me is not all the same. Each family, each individual would make different decisions on how, which bead comes after which one. And they're visibly different. So again, that is something I get to play with then with the work. I see using different people's hands and expressions in the beads itself. My family is quite involved. I have my mom and my aunts. The 2 roses I made with my mom and my sister. My cousins, my brother works for me. A lot of people. There's always a lot of music and dancing, and it's a joyful place, I have to say.
I mean, you showed us some and it's lively.
It's lively.
There's music and there's people.
And different languages being spoken.
It's an incredible place, actually.
There's definitely an energy there. There's nothing.
Totally. Sir, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I have 2 questions. One, you had mentioned she when you were referring to your teacher for creativity.
Yes.
Who was this she? Was that your Sufi instructor?
Yes.
Okay, and my second question is, in listening to your speech and lecture today, I get the idea, when you talk about the 1,000 layers of Islam and a lot of how your art helped you, is it fair to say it was a catharsis? in your life?
Absolutely. I think that was my biggest aim, was to find peace and to reset. And there's been different moments that experience was very clear, but also accumulation over time of kind of making and interacting with creativity, I think. Also just weaving. I spoke in this little video about how once you start weaving, in the past I've made an exhibition kind of equating weaving to praying, because I know that I get the same kind of experience after weaving for many hours versus praying and going on the prayer rug. The internal feeling I have is the same. And so I think the practice of weaving over time in itself has settled many things for me. There isn't that conflict I used to have, and that's why the work doesn't necessarily speak directly to my sexuality in contrast to religion as it did in the past. So yeah, definitely a lot of healing. Also that healing, I would say, has extended to my whole family.
We'll take one or two more questions, and I see a person at the microphone there.
Thank you so much. My family, my children and I had the rich opportunity to walk through your work this morning, and I was observing little toddlers come up and just like the awe in their faces and the feet, almost touching the fringe. It's so interactive, and your body feels like it's dancing and meditating to walk through. And then I also watched the hard-working security personnel. And I don't know what to do here. This is my first morning here. I'm not quite sure. And I was just wondering, as an artist, if you could speak to that dynamic of old school museums don't touch the art, but this art that will wind up being touched.
I can't hear you so well.
Oh, sorry, I need to get closer, sorry. If you could speak to the dynamic of little kids or people moving through the artwork and touching it, and then the hardworking security guards who are trying to protect the art, and just how dynamic that is. If you could speak to that as an artist, and what it's like to have your work that vulnerable and that interactive. Thank you so much.
Sure. Of course, I respect that this is a museum with rules, and I can't kind of force my own thoughts on this. Personally, if it was my studio, I'd say touch as much as you want. I understand the need to want to touch because it is so tactile. At Hayward, when we had the show in the video, I actually made a small separate piece for people who are visual or impaired and won't be able to see, but they can touch, or for kids who want to touch but they don't want to. So there was a separate piece of woven surface, some of the woven, and a cloud. That people could touch. I like the kids touching and jumping on it, and I've never been very precious with my work, but...
It stays in this room.
Yeah. No, I feel like I shouldn't have said that.
No, it's good. I mean, I think what is remarkable, if you step into that space, it does invite you to have a different relationship to an art object. It is quite uncommon for a museum like the Art Institute to invite people walking into sort of an artwork. And this is the first day of the exhibition that it's sort of open. We have to see. I mean, we take sort of the responsibility to take care of your work,
yes,
and to share it with as many people as we can, quite seriously. But it is a living, a breathing thing. So,
and I like to show people the back, because the back can be quite exciting.
Yeah.
I don't think you should look at it.
And we've even showed them sometimes. Some
Yes.
of the wall-based weavings, kind of front and back visible. Which is great. I think we
Another
may
question?
have to conclude with the last
There's one
question
more.
over there.
Thank you so much for your work. I did stand in front of the rows and cried tears. There was something about looking at all of those materials and the memory that's imbibed and imbued there, that it's really touching. And it was the guard who sort of interrupted my reverie to say I was standing a little too close. But my question to you, I was reading in the catalog a note, a note to us about this inflection point, this turning point. It comes in crisis, obviously, where you did wrestle with the senses of identity and came to a point of self-acceptance. And I was wondering if there was such a point for you, even as an artist, to be able to claim that title.
Yeah, for sure. I can share with you some things. I always say that there's a lot I shouldn't share because I would probably be locked up in a mental institution if I told you everything I experienced through Marukia and her teachings. But there was a moment when I first started, in my earlier life, I spoke a little bit about these prayer rugs that I'd used in the past, and there were two particular installations I made. The one was a prayer rug installation where all of the rugs were facing Mecca, and there was this big snake that was swimming inside this holy space where people were asked to remove their shoes. The snake comes from dreams I had. So during that time, I had these really strange and vivid dreams of it was recurring, actually. So in this dream, the first dream I had was myself and this little kid, and the kid threw something into this pool of water, and on the surface of the pool of water, there were 4 snakes swimming on the surface, with this large snake that came from the bottom of this hole of water and took the 4 ones into its mouth and exited the pool. The next night, I dreamt again of this little kid and me fighting the snake. At times, it was one large snake. At times, it was multiple snakes kind of just under the surface of the sand. And as we step, these snakes are just kind of next to our feet. We just miss it. But there was an ongoing dreaming of this snake in some form and this boy. And the boy grows up every time I dream of him. So the last dream I had was me and him, and he was a little bit bigger. I could never look at him. I could never see him, but he was always just there, my ally, combating the snake. And the last dream was the snake turning into partly human and partly snake and throwing these big, massive boulders at us. The last dream I had was I was in this warehouse space, and there was this... there was all these kids, and I knew in the dream that it was my responsibility to take care of the kids, or at least make sure that they were safe. And as they moved past me, there was this man that kind of approached me. And the man started crying, and we hugged each other, and we said, "I love you so much, I love you, I've missed you." And I was kind of, in my dream, enveloped in this kind of unconditional love. That's the best way I can describe it. There was the reassurance that I never needed to do anything to deserve this level of love, nor can I do anything to reduce it. It's always available to me. But at some point, I look at this man and I say, "I love you so much. I've never loved like this, but I don't know who you are. Who are you?" And he says, "I am you." And this was the last time I had those dreams. And I've made installations based on these experiences in the dreams. And I think in this moment, my life changed. I was never the same. There's something about that, the memory of that experience, that has completely changed me. I don't know if that answers, but I would say that... Thank you.
Thank you. I was just actually going to say that I need your help with something, and that is to welcome Igshaan one more time to Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to thank you. really, for being here with us, for sharing your work through this exhibition and the book, for speaking so beautifully and generously about the stories behind all these works that we can all go and see now. Come on a Saturday if you want a lot of people in the space. Come on a Monday if you want to be alone. There's multiple days that you can come, and I really, really hope you do. And thank you for being here, and come back soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.